the Olympus E-PL5. And so this camera you can pick up for about $180. And so this is a mirrorless camera released in 2012. This has a micro 4/3 size sensor with a 2x crop factor. It can shoot 16 megapixel raw photos. It can record 1080p video up to 30 frames per second. And this has a micro 4/3 mount, which is another mirrorless lens mount that you can adapt a bunch of lenses to. The micro 4/3 lens mount is another extremely versatile lens mount with almost unlimited lenses and any different price range for it. Now these are actually typically a lot lower price point lenses than other lens mounts on this list, like the Canon EF mount and Sony E mount. The micro four thirds lenses for this are typically a lot smaller, lighter, and cheaper. Now if we flip this around here, it has a 3-inch tilting touchscreen, so it's pretty decent, but it's not fully articulating. But it does flip all the way up like this to kind of get that selfie view right there. It also flips up like that and kind of out. You can tilt it down. So this is a pretty decent screen, and like I said, it's also a touchscreen. But there is no viewfinder on the back. Now I think you can purchase a viewfinder attachment that like connects to this, but you're gonna have to pay extra for that. And it doesn't have a viewfinder built in. Now this can shoot photos up to 8 photos per second, so it's the fastest burst speed on this list, and 8 photos a second is actually getting up there. It's pretty decent, but again, it's nothing compared to like the brand new expensive cameras, of course, that are gonna get up to like 20, 30, 50. And you also get an ISO range between 200 and 25,600. This camera also has built-in stabilization, which is great to see, and if you do have a lens with stabilization as well, it'll combine those together to get even better stabilization. So that is awesome to see. Now there is no built-in flash on this camera. I believe the only camera on this list with no built-in flash, but it kind of makes sense because this is another ultra compact and small camera. But what's really good to see that the A5000 didn't have is this has a hot shoe built in, even with it being such a small camera. I would personally much rather have a hot shoe than have a built-in flash. So it's good to see that on this camera, but again, no built-in flash if that's something that you typically want. And you do just have one SD card slot in the battery compartment at the bottom here. And this is one of those cameras where that 1/4-20 thread is right next to this battery tray. So if you mount a tripod plate or something, you're not gonna be able to open this battery door up, which means you won't be able to replace your battery or your SD card without pulling it off the tripod and taking that plate off, and all that sort of things. So kind of annoying, and I would have at least liked to see the SD card slot on the side of this camera, but it is what it is. They kind of had to pack everything into this small of a body as it is, so I can't complain too much. And last but not least, this camera has no weather sealing, and it comes in at a weight of 325 grams. So again, pretty much the main standout feature of this camera is just how small, portable, and pocketable it is. The autofocus is nothing amazing, and I personally use manual focus the whole time I used this camera. But don't get me wrong, it still takes great looking photos. There's just not any like exceptional standout features like some of the other cameras had on this list, but it does have that micro 4/3 2x crop sensor. So that means if you use telephoto lenses on this, you're gonna have that 2x crop on your focal length. So I really liked pairing this with telephoto lenses to get an even longer reach on them. And you can get some really good wildlife photos and stuff like that. And like I said, it also has IBIS built in, which means on those long lenses, you're gonna have a little bit better stabilization than the other cameras that wouldn't have any sort of built-in stabilization at all. But the video features are also somewhat limited on this. It does do 1080p at 30 frames per second, but there's no microphone input on this camera. Even though it does have the hot shoe where you can mount a microphone, there's no sort of 3.5mm microphone jack on this camera for an external microphone. I also kind of found the menus and changing settings and stuff in this camera a little finicky. It's very limited in terms of buttons and dials. The screen is pretty low resolution for, going through the menu and checking your photos and stuff. And so that was a little bit finicky. Also, again, using this camera in the bright sunlight without a viewfinder, I had a lot of trouble getting focus with this. Luckily, you do have this focus zoom button up here that makes it really easy to zoom in and click it again just to zoom back out again, for checking your focus with this camera. But again, I had a great time using this camera. There just aren't any really amazing standout features besides just how small and portable it is. And of course, you have that micro 4/3 lens mount if you have micro 4/3 lenses or want to purchase those types of lenses. So who would I recommend this camera to? Honestly, this is another great travel, really tiny camera. Micro 4/3 lenses that you usually purchase for are also very small and light. So you can build a tiny kit with this camera, or if you want to adapt vintage manual lenses, like I said, I typically used manual focus because with photos and videos, the autofocus isn't the best on this camera. And the Micro Four Thirds mount is great for adapting vintage lenses or really adapting any type of other DSLR lenses. So I would definitely recommend this if you want a tiny, really travel-friendly camera to take with you on vacation or with traveling, or just to throw in your pocket, because again, this is an absolutely tiny camera.